Okay, so in the last video, we took a lot of the things we've been learning and we basically put them all together. We showed you how the anticipation of the higher low rule is ultimately the same as kind of looking for and seeing an accumulation, a reaccumulation, which is all the same thing as a stage one. And before we go any further, I just want to make sure this is understood in your mind because based on every example we've looked at thus far, every time we have this anticipation of the higher low rule, every time we have a sideways based market, the stage one, that's usually created by the flush out that occurs, you then get the stage two that comes from that market. So overall, when I explain this to you, right, we should all now understand this is how accumulation actually begins, right? You have the anticipation of the higher low rule, followed by accumulation into reaccumulation, which is also stage one. Now, the reason that I label this as a start of a cycle is because, as a lot of us know now and understand, as per the last video, look at examples. When a stage one occurs, a stage two likely comes after it. Stage one occurs, a stage two comes after it. This is in itself a simplified version of a cycle. One into two, one into two, one into two. And then the more in-depth, a more full cycle approach, like if you want to give a more in-depth approach to what happens to a market when it's trending, the full cycle of a move, once created by the anticipation of the higher low rule, is kind of as follows. What you'll actually see is you'll see some kind of major flush. So let's actually think about this as a drawing as well. So you'll have some kind of move of some sort, and then you'll have more so of like a major flush, one that moves below, let's say, all the moving averages, and one that undergoes a longer term stage one. That major flush will lead to, as we understand, a stage one. And that in itself is kind of the start of a cycle. You can call the start of a cycle a major flush or the fact that you're having this happen because both of these, if you think about them, happen in the same respect. When you get a major flush of some sort, that flush is leading to an anticipation of the higher low rule met on some level, which means you're likely undergoing some kind of accumulation, right? Because again, as we think back to some of the prior videos that we had, an anticipation of the higher low rule is an accumulation, which is going to be a reaccumulation because, if this starts to go and it reaccumulates, it's basically just a reaccumulation, which is an accumulation over and over and over again. It's all the same thing. So in general, what a full cycle might look like, and the reason I say might look like is because price does not deliver, as we all understand, in these perfect cycles of perfect moves. Instead, it's almost a hybrid of the move. And I'll show you examples soon. But the full cycle in general, as per the drawing we're having here, is that you have a major flush. The major flush is what creates the potential anticipation of the higher low rule, which actually puts us in motion for stage one, which in itself, again, is an accumulation. So all of that is happening at once as you get this major flush, right? MF, major flush. That major flush and its build up into, let's say, MBs or whatnot, which is what you saw in the last video. So MBs come from this, right? These start building MBs out of this area. Maybe you get another flush and maybe new MBs start to get built and maybe new MBs get built. And all of a sudden you find yourself in some kind of stage two. So all of a sudden you find yourself going from this stage one buildup that happened initially from a flush out, which created the anticipation of the higher low rule, which created overall accumulation because we understand that accumulation comes from, right? Basic accumulation is basically this thing right here occurring, and those stage ones and twos are buildups of true accumulation. So again, what we're getting is from a major flush, which creates an anticipation of the higher low rule, which creates this accumulation over time, and something based over time creates a stage one. From there, we build up the MBs, which lead to, inevitably, a stage two. And a stage two comes out of the market. Now, at this point, and the reason that I call this initial thing right here a start of a cycle, so if I go ahead and make this blue, because the reason we call this thing happening a start of a cycle, so that's this right here as a start of a cycle, is because from this point forward, the cycle can go through a number of variants in the way that a trend may deliver. Okay, what I mean by this is when you get your initial stage one, into the stage two, the next potential flush, so let's assume the next flush, so this would be this guy right here, here's a flush. That flush could be a flush that leads to smaller based ones into twos, right? And then continues delivering. So this is one of the opportunities through which price may deliver in a trend, and it will repeat, or instead of going through a stage one into stage two, it might go through, as we kind of understand, fractal stage ones and stage twos. So let's do this in red. Again, remember, if this is a little bit confusing right now, that's okay. So let's do this like this. Just like that, okay? So what we now have is that you get this initial, let's go through the cycle again, just step by step, so I don't get lost and you also don't get lost, right? A full cycle starts with some kind of potential flush out, a major flush out, because that flush out leads to the anticipation of the higher low rule, which in itself begins the process of accumulation and begins the process of a buildup of a stage one. In a buildup of a stage one, as we understand, MBs begin to form. Those MBs, multiple, sometimes more, end up forming the move into a stage two. So we got to this point right here by this point right here. That's your stage two. From that point, what you get is some kind of flush, a circle that is black. We'll just, so that's the black circle. So you get some kind of flush. There's your black circle, some kind of flush. Now that flush, okay, will lead to either a stage one into new stage two, which is what you kind of see here, right? Or like a repeat of this here, right? Or it leads to what I covered in red here, a fractal stage one into fractal stage twos. And you can see these dots. You can see these little dots that I drew right here, these dots and these dots. These represent continuity or repetition until failure. So what I mean by that, and bear with me because again, first we do the understanding, then we go into examples. And again, you'll be able to go back to the video before this one where I showcase kind of a live example and then see this for yourself, okay? So on average, let me actually delete this so it's not in the way for a second. Now it's okay if you drew that, but we're gonna go over this in a sec. So from this point, if we go in black, let's make that bigger and make it a little smaller. So from this point, right, we have this stage one, that's the stage one, into stage two, that's the stage two, that's drawn as the green. What I'll do is I'll highlight this. So here's your stage one. I drew it as green up here, make this a little smaller. And here's your stage two. I drew it as green up here as well. Then we go through some kind of flush, okay? We go through some kind of flush. And ultimately, what we normally see in this flush, right, is that price actually re-flushes out kind of deeper, right, a more deeper flush. And then once again, that starts the precedent for some kind of either anticipation of a higher low rule or just a basic stage one, right, that leads into some kind of stage two. So this is one aspect of a delivery that may be happening, just like this. This is one aspect of a delivery that may be occurring. Then a stage two occurs, right? And that's this right here, stage one to stage two. Now, the other thing that can sometimes happen or can happen within itself because it's a hybrid is what I circled here in red as a fractal stage one and fractal stage two. So the other thing that can occur, if I take this right here and I put it right here, and then I delete this again, is instead of undergoing the same kind of stage one and the two, you start getting fractal stage ones and stage twos, which are smaller versions of the underlying ones and twos, right? Where you might get a move that looks something like this, where you get a one and delivers in two, a one that delivers in two, right? And then maybe it fails past that, okay? And goes through a deeper flush out. So these right here, let's do it in orange. So this right here repeats for an X amount of time. This is never always like a predictable thing, but beautifully enough, when you're building out an edge, what you're actually doing is you're focusing on finding price action or finding markets that are meeting some of the beginning aspects of what a general cycle looks like. So by the time you're positioned, you get to play that out until the next major flush happens that likely takes you out of the market or gives you new opportunities, which is what you saw in the last video examples where we saw basically the market go, and if it took us out, it started providing new examples, okay? So this right here is what a full cycle, let's say, of a trend may actually look like. On average, what you'll see happen, if we work through it again, is for a full cycle, you'll get some kind of major flush and some kind of, let's say, bullish market. Within a bullish market, a major flush will come out of the market. That major flush will lead to, right, a anticipation of the higher low rule being met on some level. And because that's happening, because that rule is being met, what is going to happen if the move is going to continue, if we know the composite operator likely wants to take that move higher, and if it's actually going to happen, what's going to happen is orders are going to step into the market to buy up the market, thereby undergoing accumulation. Orders get accumulated in that area, right? And as orders get accumulated, you start to see the buildup of MBs, okay? And MBs begin to become validated. So everything we spoke about in the last video should now start to kind of make a lot more sense with just this understanding in terms of how a market moves and why these things are all equal to each other. Okay, and the fact that we have something that is now met, let's say the anticipation of the higher low rule, price having held the flush out and started to build accumulation through MBs, because all of this is happening, it's why we call it a stage one. And because a stage one is happening, regardless of kind of where it's occurring, because at the moment all we're kind of focused on is the entry time frame, as you know, EVC, but we're on the entry time frame. As a stage one occurs, like this, we actually put in the potential start of a cycle. And that start of a cycle puts forth the ability for price to start delivering in this way, or, and don't forget this because it's very important because it's most common, right? Let's draw it again. You get this move, major flush to the anticipation of the higher low rule. Maybe MBs start to get built, MBs start to get built. Maybe it fails again, and then MBs start to get built down here, because those are the ones that actually want to support the price and move higher. And then as a stage two begins, instead of anything happening from this, it just kind of chops and fails down, right? Because remember, markets are not this perfect thing where just because we've decided we're following it for potential trends, that it's going to deliver in potential trends, right? Instead, this is the general thing that happens. We have, kind of a full cycle one, a full cycle two, or the common three. Because again, you need to remember that as a trader and as a trend-based trader, or as a trader that's looking for demand to enter, MBs to validate, overall demand to validate, accumulation to be true, stage ones and twos to start going and going and going, or for the simplistic cycle of 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 to occur, a trend actually needs to exist, right? Big money needs to come in and continuously keep coming in. But the reality of most markets is that money might not keep coming in, and as a result, you get basic failure, which is a normal occurrence. But again, in the event of non-failure, in the event of trend continuity or trend continuation, in the event of continuous accumulation, what you end up getting is basically a variant of these right here, right? Accumulation, stage one leading into stage two. And stage one and two setting the precedent for new ones and twos and ones and twos and ones and twos. Or fractal ones and twos. So just smaller base versions, right? And then in the next video, we're going to look at a few examples of this using kind of the example we just used a second ago, just to explain this in a more deeper light. Okay, I'll see you in the next one.